We are discussing in the state of Iowa how to restore voting rights to felons on an across the board basis as opposed to case by case, which is the situation now. And it has been an uphill battle in the legislature for some of the reasons that came up in the state of Florida. People in Iowa said, well, when have you discharged your sentence? Is it when you walk out the door of prison, a halfway house? Do you have to pay your fines and restitution? And that literally is the issue in Florida right now.
The issue in Florida right now is very much like that, Jeff. So back in 2018, voters overwhelmingly voted to amend the Constitution to basically say if you have completed your sentence and fulfilled the conditions of your probation, that's going to be the hang up, as I'll explain in a minute, you can have your voting rights restored. So this does not, just so our listeners know, this does not apply to murders and sex offenders. But there are plenty of other grades of felonies that you could have full voting rights restored. Think about how important that is in this election year. Many people want to be involved in the political process, and it shouldn't be a hindrance that they can't prove that they finished their sentence. And that has been the catch here, is some are alleging the way that Florida does, or I should say doesn't, keep track of who's done what on probation, they can't prove that they're now eligible to vote. So there's actually a trial going on now. You'll love this, Jeff, as a lawyer, by telephone and internet, where a judge is hearing testimony and hearing arguments on both sides of this issue in Florida in order to resolve this issue in time for this very important election coming up in November, which is going to be here before we know it, to see if that class of felons that is now eligible to have their voting rights restored can vote in time.
This is reminiscent of the old days of a poll tax, which was declared unconstitutional.
Right.
You shouldn't have to have any financial wherewithal in order to cast the vote. But when the rights to vote have been taken away, as in with a felony, and the condition is complete your sentence, discharge the sentence, that does have a very different definition for a lot of people. Is the requirement that you have to pay your restitution, your fines, etc., does that actually, do you think, constitute a poll tax?
Well, that's part of what the judge is deciding, because that's part of the argument. You know, as a prosecutor, I've spent years understanding that we don't have a debtor's prison. This is sort of similar to that. You can't punish people for not having the money to come up with fulfilling the terms and conditions of probation. You can ask them to do the best they can. You can ask them to look for a job. But if they are indigent, you can't pay to play, pay to vote, pay to get in or out of prison. So these are some of the issues that judge is looking at to decide, is it fair if all you owe is money and you've done everything else you were supposed to do? You've done your community service, your volunteer work, you've picked up your trash on the side of the freeway, all the things that people have to do on probation. Is not paying whatever fines you owe, if it's in good faith, can that keep you away from the polls?
And I'm reminded, at least in this state, and I think in others, if you are a non-custodial parent and you are not current in your child support, they cannot deprive you of visitation with the child. In other words, financial issues have nothing to do with whether or not you get visitation. But I almost wonder in this case, if they say, if you're on probation or parole, your sentence is not discharged. I think most of us would agree with that from a legal standpoint. And one of the requirements of probation or parole is paying everything. And if you don't, it's not uncommon for those things to be extended. That might be one legal way to, in essence, keep moving the goalpost, but it gets around the idea of it being a poll tax. It's a condition of sentence discharge.
That's right. And you know, the way I've seen this is in restitution. This happens a lot, where the government, the state, only has jurisdiction over you during that period of probation. And once that jurisdiction has ended, then civil remedies kick in, and the victim, of course, can pursue that. But like they say, you can't get blood out of a turnip. If somebody doesn't have that money, nobody's getting it. The government's not getting it. The probation department isn't getting it, and victims aren't getting it. But should that inability to pay, if that is genuinely and authentically what it is, should that be the reason that you're not permitted to vote? That's a very important question that this judge is deciding. Bless his heart for deciding to conduct a very out-of-the-box, unorthodox trial, because it was just that important to the people that this impacts that want to be able to participate in the process.
Especially in a state like Florida.
And in a state like Florida, that's a swing state, and where very important elections are often decided by just a few votes, as we found out the hard way in years past.